It seems a lot of you really enjoyed the first EVA deck profile I did. The price market, maybe not so much. I apologize to all of you that did not manage to pick up the pieces on time when the set came out and now have to suffer the consequences. What consequences, I don't know, but nevertheless, I feel a need to apologize. Anyway, hello, I talked with Eva again, and Eva got some support in set 8, so today we're going to be talking about it. It's been a long time since we did a deck profile, and I also didn't realize that set 8 is coming out so damn soon in English. Like, we had set 8 come out in Japanese like about a month ago. It's not even been a... Has it been a month already? I guess it has been a month, actually. But I was really busy from like the middle of December all the way until the end of December when I went back to visit my family, and when I was visiting my family, I wasn't really doing anything with cards or the channel too much. I was just uploading videos that I had already recorded and streaming once a week. Yay! Good thing that holidays are a thing. But, of course, the set came out, and the week after the set came out, there was a big tournament, which was the Trail Grand Championship, and luckily, I managed to come top 8. Sadly, we did not go past top 8. It was a team tournament, like most Japanese CSs these days are, and let me actually find my record. I'll talk about how I did in the tournament a bit later, but I did have it actually written down. Yeah, I'll talk about this at the end. This will be a pretty interesting breakdown of the run, but the list I'm going to present today is going to be a little bit different from the list that I got top 8 with. In my opinion, it's an improved list because, of course, after that, I got super busy, and I was really busy during the time of the tournament, which is why this deck profile didn't come out earlier, and I was sleeping like 3 or 4 hours a day, which is really not good. But I've made some improvements based on what the Japanese side of the game has been experimenting with this deck, and, of course, I've been testing them out myself in tournaments and been pretty happy with them too. But every time I talk about the certain like way that the build is now, I will also mention what the build was when I got top 8, but if you also want to just see it right now, here you go. This is the list that I got top 8 with that I uploaded on Twitter the day of. Anyway, let's get into it and talk about it. Also, beautiful Lucina Matt, please say something nice about it. It is the Fire Emblem Engage release week as we speak, and I'm very excited. I've been going pretty ham on the Fire Emblem mood. As you can see, there's a whole lot of Fire Emblem going on in my life right now that I'm pretty excited about. Not gonna lie, Fire Emblem's pretty cool. Yeah, just thought you should know that. So anyway, we're not going to break down everything in like super detail the way we did in the first deck profile, because a lot of things will just be like repeating information. The ride line is still the same, and if you haven't seen the first deck profile, I do recommend you still watch it, because in there I kind of teach the basics of EVA and how the deck actually functions. So the ride line is the ride line, nothing too special there. It is basically like in terms of what you want to do, and the mulligan, it hasn't changed too much. There are some cards that you play less of now that like, but the things you mulligan and the priority that you mulligan is also more or less the same. That's basically how it is right now. So ride line is the ride line, one of each EVA. That is pretty simple and straightforward. And then of course, to top it off, we are playing 3 copies of the Persona Ride, because of course you have to. This is a Persona Ride based deck, and we're actually not playing the extra copy of the Goblet, which would give you an extra Persona Ride technically, because it is an order card, and we want to be setting orders every single turn and doing that, you know, until we win the game. So basically there's no timing to play a normal order in this deck, because you can only play 1 order per turn. So just the 3 extra EVAs for Persona Ride, but we usually dig them out. And now instead of prioritizing Combine Rusher in your mulligan, you prioritize the Persona Ride a lot more. So Persona Riding became a lot more important because the explosion of power is much higher. Then let's break down the orders. So of course the orders have changed quite a bit, because of course we're still running 4 copies of the grade 1 promo order. Yes, this is the most expensive part of the deck, I'm pretty sure still. In English, this is a lot easier to get soon. I believe starting from set 9, they will start including orders like this that were promo initially, or just promo cards in general will start being included as box toppers going forward. So that's really cool. This will make this deck a lot more accessible in English. In Japanese, it's pretty expensive. Like the foil version costs like 50 bucks, the normal version costs like 25. So yeah, it's not exactly a cheap deck in Japanese either these days. And if you didn't get this from shop tournaments, well, for us, the shop tournament promo period for this is over. I think in English it might still be on, or some shops might still have stock of these promos, but basically, if you don't know what this does, you can play it if you have an EVA Glitter Vanguard, and it's a grade 1 set order that is also a research order, and it says in the order zone, all of your Obscodates, Obscodate named rear guards, do not get retired by your opponent's card effects. So that's very important, because we have a new Obscodate now. And in the order zone, if you have 4 more research orders in the order zone, you can put it to Soul to countercharge 1 and choose a card in your drop zone with Obscodate in its name and add it back to your hand. So again, this now works even better in being able to to recur 2 different types of Obscodates and protect 2 different types of Obscodates as well. So of course we have 4 copies of the grade 1 research order. This is just kind of, you know, a given that it's going to be played, but the only other, and that's right, the only other research order that is being played after this is the new grade 3. The world is a blue laboratory. So this card is, in my opinion, the best card that Eva got from set 8. It is a grade 3 set order. There's also a research card that says you can play it if you have an Eva Glitter Vanguard. And it says when you place it in the order zone, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and you may call 1 card from among them and then shuffle your deck. So you may already be thinking, it's like, ooh, wait a second. Mr. Obscodate says when he's called by an effect, he gets an extra critical. And that's right, he will get the extra crit in when you call him in the main phase as well. It doesn't have to be just in the battle phase. So that is also very cool as just like an extra thing you do on turn 3. And then on top of that, it says in the order zone, once per turn, you can Soul Blast 1 and rest 3 of your researches in the order zone in order to choose a card with a glitter ability and give it plus 5k power. So that second skill you do use every so often depending on how you've made your build. It really depends on if you play Bubble Mines, it depends on if you play Waberos, it depends on if you play Secundel, or if you choose to use Secundel. You usually don't choose to use the draw part of it, which is a Soul Blast card. But basically, there's quite a few things, like it depends on if you've been drawing your Persona Rise, it depends on how you've been managing your soul so far, if you've been using these researchers actively, right? So you will use that skill to Soul Blast 1 and give the plus 5k power sometimes, and what you give plus 5k power to actually depends quite a lot as well. Sometimes it will be just the Vanguard itself, so just give it to Eva in order to make her hit for bigger numbers, but sometimes you'll give it to the Obscodate because the Obscodate will then hit for 28 without Persona Ride, which is pretty good. If you see that you're, 23 is guardable with just a 15k shield, which most decks have a plethora of. But if you give it the extra plus 5k, if your opponent doesn't play front trigger, suddenly you're asking for 2 cards to be guarded, which means they're more likely to take that attack as well. So you kind of have to think about that with those mind games in mind. But the main selling factor, of course, of this order is the fact that it calls a card from the top 5. Now, obviously, I'm gassing up Obscodate here, but he's not the only good thing that you can call. If you find Combine Rusher that you didn't have earlier, you can call it. If you have a Waberos, you can call it and then draw off of it too. If you find a Bubble Mine, well, that's another counter charge and a soul that you get. So basically, anything you find there is cool. Sometimes you will look at top 5 and find like PG, PG, trigger, 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 and you're gonna be like, I kind of want to draw into the PG and I want to like check the triggers. So sometimes you won't target anything, but sometimes just calling the PG is fine against certain matchups where you don't really need the PG as much. So things like big multi-attack decks where PGs aren't as useful, or things like Flagberg where the PG is not going to do much anyway. So obviously there, it's much more accepted to call out the PG if you see it, but with triggers, generally speaking, I choose to keep them in the deck because, the whole kind of win con of this deck is thinning until you check triggers and win. Like, that's kind of what the deck does. So this is the order lineup, and we are not playing a copy of Experiment Successful, but I was playing one copy of it in the list that I topped with. So basically, I will explain what took the space of that one card in a bit, right? Because first things first, we got to talk about our Obscodates. So Obscodates, of course, are playing 4 of the grade 3. So he is still the best Obscodate that exists. I think he's the best attacker the deck has. He's a 13k body, has intercept, has 10k shield when you have a Eva Vanguard, and on top of that, or with the glitter effect, of course, and on top of that, when he's placed on rear, if you have 3 more researches in your order zone, he gets a crit, which is of course very good. Just make sure you draw into the 3rd research. And finally, when he attacks, of course, he gets plus 10k power if you have 3 cards in the order zone, and if not, then he only gets plus 5. But usually he will have the plus 3 because you will only call him on turn 3 and onwards. So just an amazing card. I've already explained his strengths in the first deck profile, so I'm not going to go over too much, but this is of course the brand new addition, the brand new improvement to the deck, which is the grade 2 Obscodate. Now you might be thinking, oh, in your top 8 list I saw you were only playing 3, and you would be correct, because I was playing 3, because this is what the list was when I was topping with it, or when I topped with it in December. So basically I was playing the one Experiment Successful during the Trail Grand Championship because I was expecting to still play against a lot of youths, and this card is good against youth because you can bind the Waywards, and this is also nice in the mirror match, which I was starting to expect more and more and more because of course you bind your opponent's Obscodate. And it did come up in the mirror like once where I was like, yeah, it was nice to get rid of an Obscodate, but at this point there's so many many Obscodates in rotation that just because you remove the grade 3 doesn't really mean too much. So more and more times I was like, playing this card feels bad, because most of the time I would rather be playing this or the other order, right? Because you only get to play one order per turn, and you really need to choose, like, will you play this card, which lets you do literally everything, like it's an Exodia, like it lets you retire, protect, countercharge, soul charge, and get a card back that's going to be your best attacker, or you're going to try to also play a card that lets you just plus and maybe give some power too, or you're going to play a card that doesn't actually plus and just like remove something on the board. Honestly, these two are always going to be better, so that's why this card has been cut entirely. And honestly, I think unless you expect this, like, even if you expect to see the mirror all the time, I would take it more for youth than I would take it for the mirror. So it depends what you expect to see in your meta. And right now in Japan, after Chronojet, this deck is kind of seen as the second best deck, which means that in English, when BT08 comes out and Chronojet's not out yet, this deck is kind of going to be seen as the best by a lot of people, so keep that in mind. But anyway, great to Obscodate. I haven't actually explained what he does yet. What he does is Rearguard Circle, Guardian Circle. If in your order zone you have 3 or more set orders, he gets plus 5k power and plus 5k shield on both players' turn. The only issue with this is that on turn 2 you cannot really call this down as a beat stick because, well, you can, but it won't get the extra power because you only have 2 orders. And then he says Glitter Eva effect. So basically if you have an Eva Vanguard that is a glitter, then he says Rearguard Circle when he's placed by a card effect during your turn, or during this turn rather, on Rearguard Circle, then if you have 3 or more researchers in your order zone, this unit attacks your opponent's entire front row in one fell swoop. Now, when this card was first revealed, I was like, damn, dude, like his power is kind of low. We didn't really need a Vermilion effect, because at the time I was like, we already have cool removal with this order, so I was like, we don't need more removal. But times have changed. This card is actually amazing, and having 8 Obscodates means that the chance of hitting an Obscodate off the grade 3 research is actually much higher, and we like that a lot, right? This is actually a very good card, especially when it finds you an Obscodate, because if you top deck this on turn 3 in your main phase, that means you're wiping out your opponent's front row before they get to intercept with it, because this will be their first attack. And then otherwise you can just call this off of the Eva herself and it'll be good too. Now on top of that, the mirror match has become a lot more frequent. A lot of people have been picking up Eva, the deck's been getting more and more popular. Again, I think this deck is very cool and that's my favorite for a reason, so I understand why it's becoming more popular as well. And I'm happy because I think the mirrors are fun too, but this card does so much work in the mirror match because the worst thing that can happen is, for example, we had a Monster Strike deck, which is called Tenkago Ken, which basically had an effect that they had a rear guard that could attack from the back row, that attack your opponent's front row all in one fell swoop, and then had effects that would do other stuff. So basically I felt like that was the biggest counter to Eva of all decks, and now Eva basically got a counter to itself in its own card. So this card is exceptionally strong in the mirror match because it wipes out your front row. Your Obscodates that you were saving to use as shield get taken out by one dude, and that is also really strong. And of course, having 8 10k shields in a deck feels like you're playing V-Series, which is also very nice because, you know, the D era does not have that much shield power on average per deck, so having a deck with 8 10k shields ups the shield value a lot and makes this deck extremely tanky, especially when a lot of that shield comes from the board in terms of unretirable attackers. So great to Obscodate. I do think you want to play 4 copies, because the crazy thing is that even though you play 8 copies, you still run out of them sometimes. Like, you see them more because you're going through your deck more. You thin the deck more thanks to this card that you're trying to play every turn. So now you're taking 2 cards from your deck every turn through Eva's effect, plus another card through this. So 3 cards every turn potentially after turn 3 is quite a lot, which means you're thinning out quickly. Some of these will fly into the damage zone, so you might need a way to still recycle them. So that's the Obscodate lineup, and that's what I was playing instead of the 4th grade 2 Obscodate before as well. Now, some ratios that have changed. Our very reliable friend, Combine Rusher, has been demoted to 2 copies. I was actually in the CS. I was playing a bit of a different lineup. I was playing 3. So I was playing 3 in the CS, and this is like when I topped, I did have 3 in there. But throughout the CS, I started to feel Combine Rusher just isn't really as good anymore in this format. And there's a reason for this. It's still an amazing card. There's a 20k attacker. It revives itself from grave every time you play a set order from hand. And like, that's good. That is a really good card. But this is what exposes Eva's biggest weakness, which is that if you don't give Eva the second counterblast before turn 3, it will be in trouble because it will only be able to use one of its two effects. So either the top deck look or the on attack call and Obscodate, which you will always prioritize the on attack Obscodate call unless you've somehow seen all your Obscodates already, right? You want to thin out a good attacker that can swing for 2 crit. Now, the thing is, if you only have one CB, you have to choose one of those effects, and the only way to do both is to use Bubble Mine, but then you also are attacking in a not so practical attack pattern. The other thing is that Combine Rusher was really cool in the early set 6 meta because those 4 attacks were really nice, but now sometimes you just swing Eva when you have an Obscodate here and call another Obscodate here, and you don't want the 4th attack because sometimes that means that you take yourself out of heal range. So Combine Rusher is still played at 2 copies for several reasons. One, it is very important in going second, because when you go second, you assume that when your opponent will ride into grade 3, they will, generally speaking, make the kind of moves and attacks, like on average per deck, that will essentially force out enough damage into you so that you can use your deck as you wish, because rarely will a deck that wants to aggress, which is a lot of decks and overdose, like let's say Youthberg rides up to grade 3, like are they just not going to go into Tempest? Of course they're going to go into Tempest, right? They want the plus, they want to push you, they want to win. It's only like Chronojet that might just like ride, swing, rearguard, and pass, but English will not have that yet, so this is kind of speaking from my experience. So Combine Rush is really good at going second because you will not be getting damage denied as much, and it's good at just fighting back, right? If your opponent's going first and trying to rush you, this will let you swing Vanguard at rear and then Combine Rush at the other rear to just damage deny them and counter their rush, right? You're depleting their resources, which is very good. But going first, you almost never use this card because going first basically means that, oh, you called a grade 2 on turn 2, well let me ride up and swing so you don't get a second counterblast, and then, you know, that's basically it. So essentially Combine Rusher has become a bit of a like problematic card, but you still want to play it. You still want to play it because there are instances where you'll be depleted on resources, especially in the mirror match. Like this can be really, really nice because you will then overcall it so it doesn't get bound away if they play it. And also against the Chronojet matchup, it's going to be really nice because you can counter rush them basically in order to, you know, because they're sometimes going to go second, swing 3 times on turn 1, and then you can kind of just like push them back. So it's actually very nice, and that way finish your games faster. So this deck got so much explosive firepower thanks to the new grade 3 order that it's able to do that. So you still play Combine Rusher, but at 2 is basically the verdict. And then we go into the grade 1s. Grade 1s are pretty simple. We're playing 4 PGs, of course, 3 regular PGs and 1 of the Sentinel. That is the Blitz order. This one's shining because it came with Deer Days, so nothing to explain there. PGs are searchable in this deck, which is very cool. And then another change from my CS list, which is that I currently play 2 Bubble Mines, but in the CS I did play a third. So in the CS I played 3. I was basically playing 3 rushers, 3 Bubble Mines, and honestly the third Bubble Mine is still very tempting to put in, but there is simply no space for it. So Bubble Mine is still very good because, as I mentioned earlier, it is your only out to if your opponent is smart and keeps you on 1 damage, because that way you can still use both of Eva's effects. And on top of that, of course, if you go second and use Combine Rusher, it's going to be nice to get that CC back, as it always has been, right? And in general, like, you do CB still a fair bit, and your only other form of countercharge is the grade 1 Eva order, so you kind of have to like have some other countercharge option. Like I tried a list that did not run any counterchargers and instead ran this guy, the Order Searcher / 23k attacker. It was horrible. It was dog shit. Do not do it. So Bubble Mine is still very important. Played at 2 or 3 copies. I'm like lingering between 2 and 3 all the damn time, but right now there's an even other cooler addition that I'm going to make to this deck that I'm going to suggest in this deck profile, but I'm still testing it, so I don't know if it's like that good of an addition. But 2 Bubble Mine is really good. Like honestly, it's still very, very important to have that countercharge outlet and just that availability, knowing that you can dig into it, because the best way to play Eva, and this is something that I want you to write down, you know, bust out the notepad wherever you may have it, is that you should treat Eva like a Pokemon deck, like a Pokemon TCG deck. And if you don't play Pokemon TCG, it's a game where you play a bunch of one-ups because everything is searchable. Everything is searchable, and you go through the deck so much. Eva doesn't like search the whole deck, but it sees a lot of the deck, where even if you play something at 2 copies, you're more likely to see it compared to other decks like that don't have that searchability, right? Just pure drive checks won't cut it, because Eva sometimes looks at top 3, top 4, top 5 cards of the deck to find something that might be stuck at that 4th or 5th card that a deck that just like triple drives every turn not necessarily has the same kind of outlet. So that's something that's very important that I want you to keep in mind. Treat this deck like a Pokemon TCG deck and you will find a lot of success. And then our next grade 1 is a brand new addition, my FGC Kaiju friend Wabyros. So this is something that I didn't play at all in the list that I played in the CS, and so these 2 spots were the 3rd Bubble Mine and the 3rd Combine Rusher. So basically Wabyros is a really cool guy. I always, when I first saw his art, I thought this was like a fighting game controller controller, so I thought he was like an FGC alien. I think he's very cool for that. So he basically says when he's placed on rearguard circle, if your Vanguard is an Eva with a glitter or a Archite, then you can Soul Blast 2 to draw 1. So it's basically a GG, which is really good. GG's a good card. And then he says during your turn, if you have 3 or more research cards in your order zone, he gets plus 5k power. So there are a couple strong points about him. First, of course, is that he converts your dead soul into card draw, but make sure to be careful with this because it depends on what you use, right? If you've been spamming the grade 3 orders power up effect, chances are you won't be able to use this. If you've not been seeing your persona rides all game, which will happen sometimes, you're not going to get to use this as much either. So, but sometimes it helps to dig for certain pieces, right? Like if you're not seeing your 3rd research order, then God forbid, like please Soul Blast for this and try to draw into it, because if you don't, you are going to lose. So that's also very nice. And the 13k body is really cool for 2 reasons. One, it's a solo attacker, just like how we played Mamako before. We played her because she was a 13k booster / attacker, sometimes 15k. So that was really cool. But that now this 13k boost is actually a lot more important for a very simple reason, in that it creates magic numbers with this guy. He's 15k on his own. With this, it's going to be 28, which asks for a 2-card guard against decks that do not play fronts. And considering you're mowing down your opponent's entire front row with that attack, that's even better. So even if you call the grade 2 Obscodate off of the Eva's effect, this will still be a 28k column without Persona Ride or triggers, which is pretty good, right? So you're making good numbers. And there is a card that I'm testing going forward that will replace those spots. I'll present it to you. For those of you that are attentively listening, you will get to know. So in my opinion, this is the 2 flex spots that you kind of have in Eva. There's technically a 3rd, which is my next card, but we'll talk about it in a second. But if you live in Japan, or if you live in Southeast Asia where the Youthquake manga is available, I really hate that they did this. Please stop locking really good promos behind like these weird purchase methods that the West never knows if it's gonna ever get. But basically, if you buy Youthquake, you get this cool little promo. His name is a Versatile Assembler, and he's very versatile. He says, when placed on a rear, you Soul Blast 1 and look at the top 7 cards of your deck for a set order, add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. And then rearguard circle once per turn. When your other unit is placed by a card effect on rearguard circle, for that turn this unit gains boost. So basically, there's a very interesting comparison between these 2 cards, where this, they both Soul Blast to plus. This one just draws you cards. This one might whiff, but if you've not seen your set orders in the early game, that Soul Blast 1 into top 7 will most likely find you it. But of course, in the late game, if you still have set orders left in your like 7-card deck or whatever, like I've literally won a game like this. I had a 7-card deck, played him down, went Soul Blast 1 to look at top 7, found the last order, and then basically used Eva's skill to filter out the last non-trigger card in my deck. The remaining deck that I had was 4 crits, 1 front. Like, you can actually do that. And the boost skill is also really cool, because basically what this guy allows you to do is how Weibiros is more focused on supporting grade 2 Obscodate, the Assembler is focused on supporting grade 3 Obscodate, especially on the turn 3, because basically you call him down, like on turn 2, if you want to just search the set order, you can call him down and just like bash, right? He allows for some early aggression. He's your only other grade 2 other than Combine Rusher and Obscodate. But with a grade 3 Obscodate, if you call him down, let's say like you swing with your rears and then you attack with Eva and call this down, then together, you know, Obscodate normally is just 23k attacker, so he's stopped by 1 trigger. With this, he's 33k in a column because you called this by an effect, so his boost skill goes off. So you make a 33k column on turn 3, which is pretty hard to guard for most decks, especially if they went second. So for that reason, I think that this is a very cool kind of play that you can do, and I highly recommend it, because honestly speaking, like, it's the main factor is whether you have this card available or not, and I'm not sure how they're going to distribute in English. So for the time being, for the English viewers, I'm recommending Weibiros. I think Weibiros is still a very good card to play as a 2-of. Sorry, we took a long time talking about him. And then the final card that is not a trigger is the 1 copy of Secunda. That's right, I am not parting ways with this lovely alien, because this is a discussion that we must have. Because essentially, you might be thinking, okay, we're playing 8 copies of Obscodate. Surely you don't need Secunda anymore. Why would you need to return your Obscodates, bro? Well, let me tell you, being able to return specifically grade 3 Obscodate is what's often gonna win you the mirror and most matchups in general. Because obviously you can return it with the grade 1 set order, but when the game gets really long, which the mirror match always does, in the mirror match, your opponent is not your actual opponent. The opponent is the clock, the time. So in those instances, you need that grade 3 Obscodate to rip out their freaking shield power. Or sometimes in the mirror match, you need the grade 2 Obscodate because you need to just mow down their front row. And just returning one card with the grade 1 order sometimes is not enough. And so sometimes you'll run out of it and you still need to like get Obscodates to keep going. So this will give you that avenue. You can even return, and you can check this in Dear Days, you can return set orders. I've told you before, you doubted me in the comments because the English text for this card is wrong, but in the Japanese version, it says that you choose a non-trigger unit. A non-trigger unit is anything that is not a trigger. So set orders are fine. You can target them. Try this out in Dear Days. You can do it. Trust me. You can also return the, Persona Rise if you wish to do that. That's also great. But basically, this card is still important as a one-of. And because we're treating this deck as a Pokemon TCG deck, you are going to see your one-of when you need it. If you damage it, so too bad. You're still going to win without it. It's not like it's necessary to win, but I really value this one-of. And when I played the mirror match against the person that literally taught me Eva in the first place, I was literally taught Eva by a person who was building the deck way back in summer 2022. We were talking about this card when I played. It was literally like Shisho versus like, it was like master versus student. Like I was the student who like took up the blade and I was like ready to show him what I've mastered, the power that I've gained. And he was the one that taught me this freaking deck in the first place. And I won the mirror match because I had this guy. And when I played down the Secunda and put back the Obscodate, I was like, damn it, you got this. I was like, damn right, I got this. So Secunda is just really important because it recycles specifically grade 3 Obscodate, because even though you play 8 Obscodates now, you still only have 4 of the really good ones. So it's still good, Secunda is still a good one of. Triggers haven't changed since the set 6 build, but my build has changed a few times since then. 1 OT, of course, which is, this just wins you games sometimes. 4 of this crit, 4 of the effect crit. Effect crit, I honestly, you don't really need the effect crit. You never really use this effect, and you never really want to call it out of the grade 3 order, but sometimes the soul can help. Like, there was one instance in a tournament I played where I actually used it, and I had the soul for, Eva's attack effect, so I was like, that's pretty good. And then of course we have 3 fronts. So I forgot to talk about this in the set 6 deck profile because of course we didn't have this discussion in the set 6 deck profile. Also hello heals, obviously I'll talk about heals in a bit, but in the set 6 deck profile I just played fronts because the deck was plus so much more than, or plus as much / more than other decks, so the fronts were just like a natural inclusion. But then set 7 came along and Youthford came along and it was like, wait a second, you plus as much as me. And there I was like, well, to keep up with your aggression and plussing I need to play draws now to actually have cards. So I put in the draws and it was good for the meta that it was, but then now that we have so much firepower and we just outscale other decks, the fronts are back because they're also very good. I still see people sometimes here in Japan say oh, draws feel so good in Evo. It's like, no, they don't. They are good, they feel good objectively, but do fronts feel a lot better in this deck? They do. And then finally, this time around, I am only playing 4 regular heals. The reason for this is that basically at the time of the CS, and still even now when I'm testing, the meta isn't fully settled, where in Youth / Ebisu meta, there was nothing that gained crits through effects outside of the mirror match, and it's also Chrono Jet, let's not forget Chrono Jet, and nothing restood by a restand effect. Revolve forming is not restanding, Chrono Jet next staging into Chrono Jet is not restanding either, so you weren't playing either of the effect heals during that meta because they were just not useful. They were literally just less shield than these. So now though, there's a lot more of the mirror match, and if you expect to see a lot of the mirror match, play the effect heal that gains power or gains shield power when your opponent has a unit with an extra crit on it, because of course they will have the Obscodate on it with the damn crit on it and they will swing at you with it, so that will obviously help. But if you're unsure what the meta is, then don't feel forced to commit to one effect heal over the other. Running the generic ones is perfectly fine. If you see that there's going to be a lot of Minerva, well then you're going to want the restanding ones, right? Because Minerva and Dote are both really popular decks right now, and I think you guys in English have the promo for Overlord too, so that makes Dote even more popular. So if just say is Eva the most popular deck, well then you play the crit ones. Is Minerva and Dote the most popular decks, well then you're going to be playing the restand ones. But then if it's once you get Chrono Jet and Chrono Jet is the most popular deck, then go back to this. It really depends what your local meta is, so just explore. And even when playing effect heals, I don't think you need to necessarily play all 4 of them. You can play a 2-2 split of normal heals plus effect heals as we used to before. Now I've already explained some other cards as we went through this deck profile, but there are a few cards I want to talk about that are in terms of considerations, things that you can think about and talk about and that people have been discussing aside from what we talked about. So Draws, as I said earlier, are good, but fronts feel a lot better in this current meta. But when the meta slows down, or rather when Eva slows down compared to other decks, you will want the draws back again, so keep that in mind. This guy, which is the Kaiju grade 1 countercharger, well, I guess Bubbleline is too, but this is the guy that says when he boosts any attack hits, you countercharge 1. This guy's been played over Bubblemine recently in some decks because when you boost Obscodate with the bonus effect on it and you hit the 2 rear guards and maybe the Vanguard, you countercharge 1 for each time you hit. So if Obscodate hits the 2 rears and the Vanguard, you countercharge 3 in one fell swoop, which is pretty good, but the problem is that this does not work on demand. When you need the countercharge from Bubble Mine, that's the only time that you call it down. Otherwise, you keep it in hand and wait until you need it. Whereas this guy, you're always betting. You're always gambling on the fact that this will go off and that your opponent will let the rearguard swings hit, which they usually do, so you can kind of expect that to happen. But what if your opponent sees this card in your drive check and goes like, oh no, now if I let the Obscodate go through, it's going to get even worse for me, so they just play more carefully and then like pass on no front row, right? So they don't have anything that you can attack and hit into, and they just guard the Vanguard swing that you boost this for, and that's it. Your on-demand countercharge that you needed is no longer there, and you're spending deck slots on this, right? If you do not have Bubble Mine or cannot afford Bubble Mine, this is a great extra card, right? This is what called Mega Gurago is his name, Mega Grago. So play him if you don't have Bubble Mine or you can't afford it. I think it's perfectly fine. But if you do have Bubble Mine, I think Bubble Mine is better. And then finally, the last card is the Roburst. So this guy looks incredible, one of my favorite arts of set 8. But I tested this guy in a locals actually, and I just wasn't too impressed. A lot of Japanese lists have been playing this guy as a 2-of, and I tried it. I was like, well, if they're playing it, you know, I'm gonna give it a try. I'm always open to new ideas and trying out different tech and stuff like that. You know, I don't think my list is the objectively best list ever made, but I do think that, you know, if I try out a certain card and I feel like it just doesn't do what the deck wants to do or doesn't contribute to what the deck wants to do, then it's just not worth it, right? Because this guy says when he's placed on rear, you can almost 1 and then search your deck for a set order, and then if you have a set order already set with the same name as that one, you can add it to hand. If not, it just goes back to deck. So it's like, yeah, you basically kind of have to, you know, treat it as a 9th order or a 10th order in your deck, which is like if I wanted to play a 9th or 10th order, I would just play this instead maybe. But of course, this search is one of the 2 orders that you want to be playing. So you might be thinking, okay, cool, like when you don't see the order is really cool. But now that we have like the, you know, monthly Bushiroad promo, or not the monthly Bushiroad promo, the manga promo that looks at top 7 for an order, plus is a booster, is also very nice because we lack boosters. The other effect is that this guy is on attack if you have 2 or more same name orders in your order zone, then he gets plus 10k. So he's another 23k attacker. It's like, wow, great. So we have Obscodate and this guy to make big attacks. But the thing is that you don't really need more because you just call Obscodate from Eva all the time, and sometimes just 3 attacks with Eva is enough. You don't have to go for 4, right? Like just going for the 3 is oftentimes enough. You just have to assess the game state. Sadly, like in this deck profile, I cannot give you a checklist of like, okay, against Youthberg, you attack 3 times here and 4 times here and 3 times here. Like it really depends on what you're playing against, what your opponent's hand is, what you've seen through their drive checks, what weaknesses does the deck have you been damage denying, have you been pushing, like did you go first? Like there's so many different variables to it that yes, he's good as a 23k attacker, but I think that most of the time you value your hand and you don't want to be calling another card from hand. You want to be calling all your stuff from effects, right? Whether it's the card that you retrieved back to hand with the order and then called it out, which is the Obscodate, or it's a combined rusher that you got from grave, or it's an Obscodate you got from the deck, right? So having to call out more cards from hand kind of takes away from the strength of this deck, which is that you don't use your hand much outside of regarding and like rewriting persona rights and setting orders. Like that's basically it. So I think this card is cool, and I see why. I guess people just want to have that fixed like set order kind of problem and making sure they always have the 3. But when discussing with my Shisho, the great sensei that he is, we basically both agreed that this card is just not that good. It's not really that worth it in Eva right now. So that's actually going to be it. This deck profile is already long enough as it is. We're not going to be doing a mulligan because, as I said before, the mulligan has not changed terribly. It's just instead of combined rusher being your like next priority target after your set, you know, your 3rd order in your mulligan, it is basically the persona ride. And then apart from that, like in terms of the plays and stuff, again, the deck just kind of now wants to adapt to whatever flow you're trying to put it into. So if you're trying to push your opponent more, then obviously you're going to go more on the offensive, try to use your combined rushers, maybe call down like if you play Waberoth and stuff on turn 3 and stuff to attack with, but it really depends on like what you're going to adapt to. I guess you know what, I'll do you a solid. It's just after Christmas, I'm feeling generous. Let me shuffle the deck up and I'll show you a Mulligan example. But again, it really depends what you play against. I feel like it's not as useful when you are just like showing it off against like no opponent and just doing like gold fishing compared to when you actually play a game out against a certain deck. Alright, shuffled up, let's see. So we're gonna mulligan, of course, mainly prioritizing our set order. That is the most important thing, is to have the 3, and even the 4th sometimes doesn't hurt too much. So opening hand is pretty good. So Obscodates are basically gonna go back, you don't really need them early, and in order to show the least amount of information, we can just take the grade 3 set order, because having this in hand is pretty good. We could technically like keep this second one, but I'm always afraid of like not having enough shield value, and you really want the Persona Ride. So keeping one set order is fine, and then mulligan the rest to try to find Persona Rides and then see what else you get. So it's pretty good. Like we got 2 Obscodates, which kind of hurts actually. So that's why you really like to see the Secunda here. And then the Waybaross will be pretty good for the, you know, boost / attack power. And then of course the Eva Persona Ride is also going to be very nice for our turn 4 plays as well. So stand up Vanguard, and let's say we go first. We're going to draw into another set order. That's crazy. So in this opening hand, you might be thinking it's like, damn, like you actually don't have that much shield power, and you'd be right. Waybaross is kind of like something I want to keep and try to use that draw skill, because as you can already see that you have multiple Persona Rides, you can pretty much know that you're going to be safe on Soul. So I'm going to take the slightly risky decision of ditching the Obscodate. This depends on the matchup. Some matchups you will not do this against, because the 10k shield that you're ditching, you will get it back later, of course. And then we're going to search out our grade 1 research here, of course prioritizing the foils if you have any. That is the secret sauce to victory. And then after that, of course, if you go first, you're going to just set and pass. If you go second, you also draw and then pass, so, or swing and pass. So we're going to take the first swing, get a front, so basically that shuts down any other attacks our opponent would want to do, and we're going to draw. We get another order, and it's pretty good, because of course here we're going to be in a position where we don't necessarily need to, you know, worry about drawing into the 4th, but honestly, with how little shield value we have in this hand, we're actually going to ditch it, because we're going to search out the grade 1 set order here instead, and then find a 4th one down the line. So basically it's just a move that sometimes like you have to just judge the guard value in your hand and how aggressive your opponent's deck wants to be in early turns, right? If you expect to not get aggressed at all, then you can ditch one of your more offensive pieces like the Obscodate there, or you know, even a Persona Ride if you have like 3 already in hand. So obviously you kind of depends on how you want to play it out. So we're gonna just set the second one and then just swing, right? There's nothing else for us to do here. We don't want to get damage tonight. We want a second damage. We get a heal, so now our opponent needs to like crit us or something in order to do stuff. Or they just aggress, you know, because I don't know, they just felt like it. So let's say we're going to take a defensive, we get a crit. So let's say worst case scenario, let's play out the worst case scenario. We actually don't get the second damage, right? We get this crit defensive and nothing else happens, and then we would have checked the heal, so it would have been even worse. So we're going to just ditch this heal that we drew into, and then right into the Eva, and then here going to use the grade 3 research to set it, and then look at top 5 in order to find a card to call. And if it's an Obscodate, we're going to be pretty happy, and we haven't seen too many, so the chance is relatively high. And we do find a grade 2 Obscodate, so this is perfect. We're going to call it out, and he's going to get the skill to attack into the opponent's front row. So if they have anything, that's going to be great, and if not, I mean, it's still just a 15k attacker and a 10k shield that is like, even if you don't get anything to like swing into on the rearguard circles, you're still getting a lot of stats out of this card, so it's pretty good. And then of course we are going to draw off of this Waybaross, because in this case you can see we have 3 soul right now, so we're going to use 2 of it here to draw off the Waybaross and make a good column. We draw into another research card, which isn't too bad, and then basically you can choose to just keep this hand as it is and then call the Obscodate here off of this effect. So we're going to obviously keep the soul here to use for Eva's effects. We're going to just attack Counterblast 1, and then of course Soul Blast 1, which is going to be the Eva herself, and then basically just search our deck for a copy of the grade 3 Obscodate and call it to the rear. And the reason why we do this is because this way we still keep the 10k shield in hand while having 20k shield on the board, and you don't have to force these 4 attacks if you don't need them, right? Because against a lot of matchups this will be enough, right? We're swing with 18, we're going to drive check, get another order plus a PG, which is good, and then we're going to swing with 23 with the crit, and then this is going to be 28 with the front row attack. Obviously you swing with the front row attack if your opponent doesn't have any rears, or sorry, if your opponent doesn't have any rears, you do this obviously the way we did it now. But if your opponent did have a double front row, for example, you would have swung with this before anything and maybe just made a 4th attack, or just like swung with this, and then called this and swung with this. So it really depends what you want to do with it. So this is just an example, but Next turn, let's say we take 2 damage, our opponent swings, and then either clears our Obscodates or we intercept them away, you know, usually it's one or the other, and then let's say just to guard another attack, we ditch the 15k shield that we have here, so as you can see, our hand still stays relatively healthy, and then we're going to draw into a Bubble Mine, which is pretty good. Here, of course, you're going to want a Persona Ride, because that's going to get us a card draw into a PG, which is pretty good, and then, of course, set your order first. I like to set the grade 3 as the 4th order if I have it, and then check top 5 to try to filter out more Obscodates, but here, for example, we don't have an Obscodate to filter out, right? So it's like, oh, what am I going to do? Well, you're going to call this freaking Combine Rusher, because now if it ever gets to the late game and you start running out of attackers, Combine Rusher is not just a good card in the early game, and if anything these days it's much better in the late game, because you play against a lot of decks that are able to last a long time, and this will actually give you a lot bigger of an edge. So you call it out, it's pretty nice, and then you can call out the Bubble Mine here to the back, and then basically use Eva's skill to CB1, always CB your Obscodates, check top 4 for a card you can add to your hand, and we've already thinned quite a lot, so we're going to just add the Persona Ride and put the rest at the bottom here. And then now, of course, we have just a 1 soul for Eva's effect on attack, so we're going to basically have to think about how we're going to want to play this out. And basically here, what you can do is just use the grade 1 research in order to countercharge 1, and then get yourself the Obscodate back into your hand, and then just basically call this out to commit it to the board already, and then use the grade 3 researches effect to rest 3 researches, soul blast 1, and then just give plus 5k to something. So let's say we give it to this Obscodate here, and this way we still have 1 soul already to work with, so we can swing with the 30k Combine Rusher, and then swing with the Eva here in order to CB1 and soul blast 1 to filter out the Obscodate. And then basically here depends what your opponent has, right? If your opponent still has somehow a front row and you don't expect them to intercept, which they usually will, then obviously you can go for that. It depends what you have in your deck, right? So as you can see here, I have 2 grade 2 Obscodates, 1 grade 3. We're going to filter out the last grade 3, because if we can hit a Secunda somewhere in the coming turns, we can just bring back the grade 3s and just keep spamming them. But obviously in some instances, you might want to spam the grade 2 instead and wait, you know, just work off your opponent's board as much as possible. So it just depends on that. So we're going to swing, get a crit, and another order, so that's going to be pretty nice. Of course, keep in mind that if you chuck this one into the soul and you just have grade 3 orders, make sure you're not playing in something that has retire options. Obviously the mirror does not have that, because then you will get these cleared off and, you know, it's gonna hurt. So then you basically just get your swings. This is 38 plus 13, so 51 swinging here, and then this is going to be 33, 41, but with the extra crit that then goes to soul and counter charges. So this is kind of just the example mulligan of like how you play this deck out. It is honestly, it really depends on what you're playing against. It's very adaptive, and you should treat it as such. Alright, so this has been the long-awaited Set 8 Eva deck profile after the latest support, of course, together with all of the new Obscodates and all that stuff. Hopefully this video helped in explaining how the deck works, and I know some people were even DMing me for like coaching sessions for this deck. It's like, I don't really do coaching, I don't feel like I'm really made for that, but hopefully this deck profile helped for those of you that are bringing this deck to Springfest, for those of you that are bringing this deck to other tournaments, and of course just wanted to learn more about Eva. Like if Eva is really popular in your locals, you should send this to your fellow players, because it'll probably help them to know how to beat the deck, because I go over some of the weaknesses too. I did say I would quickly go over some matchups, so I'll keep it very brief. Funnily enough, the day that event happened, I had slept for only an hour and a half. I was very sleep deprived, and I lost the first round because I timed out. I would have won otherwise, and the opponent even said that after going first. That was against Jet. Round 2 I lost against Jet because I simply just went first, which means that they go second and they stride first, and I had very low shield value in hand and didn't have enough time to farm anything, so I just died. So really bad start, but my team carried there, except the first round we lost. The team carried on the second round. Round 3 against Minerva, I went second and won. So funnily enough, first 2 games I went first in both and lost. In Minerva I went second and won. Against Overlord I went second and won. So restanding decks, clearly not an issue. Our team was 3-1 at this point. Then the bracket proceeded to the second stage of top 32, I believe, where I played against the Unrestricted Elder. So with Inlet Pulse, went second and won, which is pretty impressive considering that Inlet was back. And then I played against Overlord, went second and won. And so this was another Overlord matchup where I was like, all right, feeling pretty good. Restanding decks are not too scary. And then in the final round of the top 32 bracket, before we would go to the top 8 bracket, I played against my Shisho, the master that taught me Eva in the first place, in the mirror match, and I went second and won. So you can probably tell this deck actually quite likes going second, which is pretty good. I mean, turns out being able to attack more times and be able to, you know, like it's funny because the deck doesn't care about like your opponent's Vanguard being great to be or greater. Like it works perfectly fine off going first, but I guess I just adapt better going second. Maybe it might be just a player thing. So mirror match is really hard. It really comes down to like bullying each other's Obscodates, like clearing them off and knowing who's playing how many copies of stuff and like reading the deck build, who has Secunda, who doesn't, because the deck builds are very different right now. And then in top 8, I played against Youthberg, went first, and surprise, surprise, I went first and I lost. So that one, my teammates had already lost like midway through that match, so I kind of lost motivation midway through. So that was my fault. It's also because I was sleep deprived. So maybe if I was in like better shape and didn't hear from my teammates that they both lost, I would have maybe won that match still. But at that point, wouldn't have gone up from top 8 because our team had already lost. So that was the run of the top 8 run itself. I'll be playing this deck again this weekend in another Trail Championship, which actually has an Eva and Archive playmat. So I will do my best to top once again. But otherwise, let me know in the comments what you think of the deck list. Are you playing Eva right now? Do you plan to pick it up? Do you wish that she was cheaper and more affordable and easier to access? And what other decks in set 8 are you looking forward to? I'm looking to upload more deck profiles and just like meta-analysis for set 8 because it's coming up so damn soon I didn't even realize. So would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Also, please do subscribe. I really do appreciate it. There's been less people subscribing lately and still watching a lot of content, and that like graphic and the percentage of people not subscribed has been growing. So please do subscribe. But anyway, if you like the video, give it a like. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.